Chapter 36 Nascent Mage vs Sky Knight. As the battle commenced, the 1,000-man army swiftly formed the Titan formation, creating an imposing wall of shields and spears, with crossbows at their backs. Upon activating the formation, a wave of onslaught from the Noble Alliance forces rained arrows upon them. 13 Tier 2 Great Knights led the charge, supported by Tier 1 official knights, unleashing a barrage strikes with tens of thousands arrow as a support every few seconds. The 1,000-man army valiantly held their ground, with the soldiers at the front fending off the 13 Great Knights, while those at the back of the formation retaliated with crossbow fire. However, the energy barrier created by the Titan formation began to strain under the relentless arrows, with the concentrated efforts of the 13 Great Knights inflicting substantial damage with their sword energy beams. Maximus's army began to feel the strength of their opponents, with superior numbers and stronger individual strength. Fatigue and frustration set in as they struggled to maintain the formation against the overwhelming tide of enemies. Harrington was increasingly growing impatient with the stalemate, ashamed at the sight of the seemingly smaller enemy army holding their ground against his forces. Jealousy consumed him as he wished to have such an elite army himself. In a fit of anger, he ordered the remaining 13 Tier 3 Earth Knights under his command to join the fray, hoping to deliver a devastating blow to the enemy. However, before the Earth Knights could charge forward, Generals Smith and Johnson, who also possessed the strength of Earth Knights, intercepted them. With a combination of strategic positioning, superior combat skills, and the support of 30 peak official knights in formation, they engaged the oncoming Earth Knights. The clash between the two generals and the opposing forces erupted into a storm of blades and bursts of pure mana. The two generals, with their superior techniques and pure mana, barely held back the 13 Earth Knights. Despite the advantage of the 13 Earth Knights, they soon found themselves on the defensive. The combined strength and formation array of the enemy made it difficult for them to find opportunities to strike. Through precision strikes and efficient teamwork, the enemy exploited their openings, forcing them into a defensive position. Realizing that they couldn't continue like this, they resorted to brute force, disregarding the injuries they sustained. This approach proved to be successful as it gave them an advantage, increasing the likelihood of defeating their elusive opponents. In the hidden corner of the battlefield, Maximus watched as his army fought valiantly but was quickly being overwhelmed by numbers of the Noble Alliance force. Seeing his soldiers being pushed back and sustaining injuries made his eyes twitch. He couldn't allow losses to occur in his army, not after training these soldiers for so long. Standing up, he raised his hands and channeled his mana, forming powerful frost particles. The air grew cold around him and a bluish-white energy pulsed in his palm. Without hesitation, he unleashed the spell onto the battlefield. The frost particles dispersed in all directions, spreading like a wave. Upon contact with the enemy force, an icy chill enveloped everyone, freezing them in their tracks. Ordinary soldiers and official knights found themselves encased in ice, their expressions locked. Even the Great Knights and Earth Knights felt the chilling effects, their agility and speed diminishing as frost particles covered their armor and limbs. As the ice particles froze the majority of Lord Harrington's force in their tracks, a wave of respite swept through his army, giving them a chance to catch their breath. The soldiers, who were slowing down moments ago, now had a glimmer of hope in their eyes as they witnessed their lord's power. The frost particles created an ethereal atmosphere, casting a shimmering light under the moon across the battlefield. Seizing the opportunity, the 1,000-man army roared with might and adjusted their formation. They transferred some of the energy barrier generated by their formation to bolster the defenses of the two generals and the 30-man army who had been struggling against the enemy. An aura barrier enveloped the smaller army, providing added resilience. With this newfound strength, the small army was no longer afraid to confront the 13 Earth Knights head-on. They attacked relentlessly, unafraid of injuries, gaining an overwhelming advantage. Their fierce counterattack caught the Earth Knights off guard, as General Smith seized the opportunity and beheaded one of them, instilling panic in the remaining knights. Harrington was taken aback by such a sudden turn of events. He hadn't expected Maximus to be hiding with his army, and he was even more shocked by his strength. Although he knew Maximus was hiding some secrets, he didn't know that he himself was a Tier 3 nascent mage. He had never witnessed such strength before. Panic filled his expression as he turned to his trump card, the Tier 4 Sky Knight Bartolom. "Bartolom," Harrington said urgently, "we cannot afford to lose any more troops. I want you to deal with the enemy mage." Bartolom, a formidable warrior known throughout the continent, he heard of his exploits defeating Tier 3 mages in the past. "Sure," Bartolom lazily agreed, looking at Maximus from afar, who was also observing him. He thought that although this mage was strong, the earlier spell he released must have almost exhausted his mana. But you didn't say it was a nascent mage. Your earlier payment is not enough, I'll need additional payment for this, Bartolom said to Lord Harrington with arrogance. Harrington hesitated for a moment but readily agreed. He couldn't afford to lose any more in this battle. Very well, I need you to quickly kill the enemy mage and make sure not to accidentally harm my soldiers, Harrington reminded him. Bartolom nodded in acknowledgement, his eyes glinting with excitement. It had been a while since he had faced such a formidable mage. With a surge of energy, Bartolom activated his battle stance, a radiant aura enveloping him. He soared through the air, unleashing a concentrated attack on Maximus's army. Not allowing him to succeed, Maximus erected a Tier 3 barrier projection toward the army, quickly dissipating the attack. Bartolom, somewhat shocked to see his attack easily dispelled, as he shifted his focus to Maximus. Within the chaos of the battle, Maximus and Bartolom engaged in a deadly clash. Maximus immediately activated his Mind Eyes, enhancing his senses. With heightened senses provided by the spell Mind Eye, Maximus could analyze the battlefield with unparalleled clarity, not missing any detail. Looking at Bartolom, who was eagerly charging toward him, Maximus couldn't help but find it amusing that the knight was so excited on his way to his own demise. He was aware that to a Tier 4 Sky Knight, the peak mages in this continent, a nascent mage would only be an enhanced Tier 2 Great Mage with greater mana capacity to them. However, they couldn't be blamed, as nascent mages in this continent were unable to advance further, usually heading to the central continent. Thus, spells and inheritances above Tier 2 were incredibly rare. Unfortunately for Bartolom, the one he met was a cheater having a top-tier meditation method and top-tier spell for his rank. With a wave of his hand, he summoned a searing burst of flames, engulfing Bartolom in a torrent of scorching heat. The flames danced and consumed everything in their path as Bartolom struggled to evade the inferno. Despite his dodging, Bartolom felt his mana was greatly consumed as it shielded him from the scorching heat. As the flames subsided and Bartolom landed on the ground to take a breath, Maximus swiftly attacked with another spell. His feet pounded the ground, causing a heavy shockwave that shook Bartolom, throwing him off balance. He struggled to maintain his footing after the ground sent shockwaves, leaving him vulnerable to Maximus' next attack. Without hesitation, Maximus extended his hand toward the sky, conjuring bolts of lightning. The bolts arced through the air, striking Bartolom with precision and leaving him momentarily paralyzed, without giving the knight a chance to react. As their battle continued, Maximus didn't give the enemy a chance as he demonstrated a variety of spells, as if trying to train and master his arcane arts. Satisfied with the battle, Maximus unleashed a concentrated flame burst comparable to 3 consecutive bursts, which quickly blasted Bartolom into smithereens. Until the last moment, Bartolom struggled, not even having a chance to unleash an attack. He was in disbelief as to why such a perverted mage was still staying in this poor continent. With the end of the clash, Maximus stood on the battlefield with gleaming eyes. The battle served as a training opportunity for him, testing the effectiveness of his spells against such an opponent. Although he had effortlessly killed the poor knight, he was still satisfied to know where his strength belonged. Chapter 37 Escape. The lifeless body of Bartolom lay on the ground in pieces. Maximus could sense that he still has an abundant mana. The battle had barely been a warm-up for him. Surveying the battlefield, Maximus noticed that Lord Harrington was missing. He escaped, Maximus murmured to himself. He had intended to severely damage the Noble Alliance by killing Lord Harrington, but in his excitement of testing his magic spells, he had momentarily forgotten about his primary objective. Turning his attention to his injured soldiers, Maximus channeled his mana outward, directing it toward his army as he released a healing aura. A gentle aura enveloped them, soothing their pain and revitalizing their bodies. The Tier 3 Earth Knights, seeing this and knowing this is a hopeless battle, had already started to make their retreat. However, Maximus couldn't allow them to do so. That would only create future enemies for him. Directing his hand toward the retreating Earth Knights, Maximus unleashed a flame burst that quickly annihilated the enemy. He had initially considered incorporating them into his army, but they were too strong-willed to be easily managed. He couldn't always be there to control them. However, the Tier 2 Great Knights still held value, and he decided to give them a chance to submit to his command. Some various items and spells could be used to brainwash Tier 3 Earth Knights, but they were not cost-effective or efficient. Besides, it was easier to create new batches of Tier 3 Earth Knights than specifically brainwashing a select few. Shifting his attention to the frozen 10,000-man army, Maximus waved his hand to unfreeze them. It seemed a waste to discard such a well-trained group of soldiers. While they were only slightly stronger than ordinary soldiers, they could still be incorporated into his army after some training, specifically brainwashing. Turning his gaze to his two generals, who bore the signs of battle with their rugged breaths, Maximus spoke, "Well, gentlemen, our victory today went as expected." General Smith, bearing battle scars across his body, nodded in agreement. "It was your magic that led us to victory, my lord. They couldn't withstand your power. Although they had executed their plans flawlessly, they still wouldn't have been a match for the enemy. It was Maximus's freezing spell that had turned the enemy into statues, rendering them powerless to resist." "Indeed, my lord. Without you, we would not be standing here," General Johnson added. With a satisfied smile, Maximus replied, "The battle has taken a toll on our strength for now. You can rest for a few days before we begin our attack on the remaining cities." The two generals glanced at each other and nodded in agreement. They understood that the soldiers needed time to rest and heal after such a grueling fight. "What about the enemy army, my lord? Are they dead?" General Johnson asked, looking at the unfrozen soldiers who were still in a comatose state. "No, I controlled my magic very precisely. I'm sure they are fine." "Just proceed as you normally would," Maximus assured them. General Smith and General Johnson saluted Maximus before preparing to retreat to their outpost, carrying out their orders. After dealing with the enemy, Maximus unleashed the Mind Eye spell, expanding his perception for miles and miles. To his surprise, he spotted Lord Harrington attempting to escape. The Mind Eye spell was incredibly powerful, capable of limitless expansion as long as he had sufficient mana. The tier divisions were merely for adding details and enhancing senses to better cope with fast-moving objects or hidden spells. Without hesitation, Maximus flew towards the fleeing Lord Harrington. With the Mind Eye spell active, everything seemed to slow down, allowing him to see details clearly and enabling him to fly at a speed faster than some Tier 4 Sky Knights. The chase led him through rugged terrain, and with each passing moment, the distance between them closed in. Harrington ran through the rugged terrain, his heart pounding with fear. Sweat poured down his face as he sensed someone chasing him at an alarming speed. "No, no, this can't be happening," he whispered to himself, pushing himself to run even faster by activating his Earth Knight's mana. Despite his efforts, Maximus steadily closed in on him, instilling panic within Harrington. He ran with all his might, swearing that this was the fastest he had ever run. His mind raced, desperately searching for a plan. "Damn it! How did it come to this?" He gritted his teeth and whispered in frustration. He cursed himself for underestimating Maximus. How could a mere noble count possess such overwhelming power to kill a Tier 4 Sky Knight? It made no sense. Shouldn't Maximus have left this place and headed to the central continent? Harrington darted from side to side, hoping to shake off the pursuing enemy. The sight of the dense forest ahead gave him a glimmer of hope, urging him to push himself even harder. Suddenly, a figure emerged in front of him, blocking his path. It was Maximus. "There's nowhere left to run, Harrington," Maximus said mockingly. Harrington gritted his teeth with anger. If only Maximus hadn't intervened, if only he hadn't possessed such incredible power. His goal would have succeeded. But faced with such an outcome, he knew it was over for him. "You can't stop me, Maximus. I'll make you regret this," Harrington said furiously as he activated a forbidden technique. This forbidden technique consumed his life force in exchange for a quick power boost. His body began to glow with crimson light, his muscles bulging with mana. In a matter of seconds, his strength surged from that of an Earth Knight to that of a Sky Knight. "Oh? Do you think you can defeat me with borrowed power? After I defeated the knight you brought out earlier?" Maximus chuckled, finding himself another sparring partner. He watched as Harrington charged towards him in a desperate attempt. With a wave of his hand, he conjured a shield barrier that surrounded him, testing the limits of this spell. Maximus knew that Harrington's attempt would be futile. He only wanted to see if his mana would last or if Harrington would last. Besides, he had a mana potion in case he lost his bet. With a scream, Harrington unleashed a flurry of attacks, each strike costing him his life force. His attacks collided with Maximus's barrier, sinking in like drowning in the sea, making him desperate. Maximus didn't move, letting Harrington attack him to satisfaction. His struggles were futile as his life force rapidly depleted with each passing moment. "Is this the best the Noble Alliance leader can do, Harrington?" Maximus boredly said to him. As Harrington's attacks grew weaker and weaker, his movements sluggish and blood trickling from his mouth, his life force waned. Maximus ended his misery with a flick of his finger, unleashing a flame burst that ended his life. Harrington locked eyes with Maximus one last time, a mixture of defiance and resignation on his face. He would rather die fighting than beg for mercy from an enemy. That's why, even though he knew his attempt was futile, at least he could say he fought for his survival. The rugged terrain fell silent as Harrington's futile struggle came to an end. Chapter 38 Maple Leaf City. In the outpost camp, an army camp nestled in a dense forest, providing a natural barrier to the prying eyes of the enemy. The soldiers were temporarily stationed to heal and rest after a grueling battle against the Noble Alliance army. In the camp canteen, two knights sat together near a crackling fire, their armor glinting with a soft glow. Cedric, a warrior with a scarred face, took a sip of beer and let out a sigh of relief. Thank goodness we have Lord Maximus by our side, otherwise we would be dead meat against such a large enemy force. The battle had happened just 2 days ago, but even now, he still shivered when he recalled such a battle. He was not scared of the enemy, as they could escape as long as things got out of hand, but it was the magic spell of their lord that frightened him. Such a large-scale spell, and the enemy didn't even have a chance to react before freezing into a sculpture of their nightmare. Indeed, fortunately, Lord Maximus is on our side, otherwise. Galen, a younger knight with a mop of unruly hair, nodded in agreement. He still recalled how the enemy soldier woke up from their short coma after being unfrozen. They were delirious with shock and shivering, as if they were naked in the middle of a snowstorm. As Cedric and Galen continued their conversation, the loud voice of Lieutenant Gabriel echoed through the canteen, calling for their attention. "Attention, everyone!" Lieutenant Gabriel's voice boomed, drawing the soldiers' focus toward him. "Our rest time is over. We've received new orders from higher command, and our next target is Maple Leaf City." Cedric and Galen exchanged glances, anticipation evident in their eyes. It's boring to stay in the camp all day, and battles is their most exciting activity. As they made their way out of the canteen, Cedric and Galen joined their designated team members. The sound of clanging armor and orders filled the air. Maple Leaf City stood in stark contrast to the outpost camp of Moonshadow City. The once bustling streets appeared lonely and weary, mirroring the mood of its people. The war between the Noble Alliance and the Dukes had left an irreversible mark on the people of the Fairy Kingdom. In a dimly lit tavern, where the wine had been replaced by water, a group of people sat around a worn wooden table, their faces thin and etched with malnutrition and hunger. I heard from someone in another city that was annexed by them that after attacking the city, they would provide fresh food, an elderly man said with a saddened voice. He couldn't care less if they annexed the city, as it had nothing left for them, and he heard that the soldiers were merciful and willing to provide food. "So what?" a young, thin man interjected with frustration. "We're not even sure if it's true, and even if it is, how can it be our turn?" The group nodded in agreement. The Fairy Kingdom had 93 cities and countless towns and villages. There were approximately 30 cities in close proximity to Moonshadow City that could be annexed, and Maple Leaf City was just one of them, barely on the list. The probability of them being struck is only about 3%. They didn't know if they would be even alive by then. The reason was that the noble who managed them, the one providing them with food, had escaped after hearing reports that their leader was killed, or so they had heard. Even the soldiers guarding the city had been evacuated, leaving behind the elderly and disabled. Even those burdened with heavy responsibilities or large families couldn't go. So the number of guards protecting their city was pitifully low, or even somewhat weak, leaving them vulnerable to bandit attacks. Not that there is anything the bandits can get in their poor city. And if they want to abduct girls for their pleasure, that would be a bit hardcore, as almost all of them are so skinny that you can only feel bones. The sunset draped over Maple Leaf City as a chilling wind blew through the empty streets. The handful of elderly and disabled soldiers looked at the horizon as an army of soldiers marched toward them. They exchanged knowing glances. Some were numb and some were even excited, knowing that it was an army from Moonshadow City that was coming. The rest were puzzled as the informed soldiers told them about the deeds of the army after annexing a city. After a brief discussion, one of the guards, an elderly man with a limp, slowly approached the massive gates. With trembling hands, he pushed them, and with a creaking sound, the gates began to open. Although it was a sign of surrender, none of the guards showed sadness. Each of them excitedly steps aside from the gate to invite the approaching army inside. As the army marched closer to Maple Leaf City, their steps faltered as they witnessed the gates slowly opening with the guards stepping aside in surrender. Confusion and surprise flickered among them, spreading whispers among the soldiers. "Where's the exciting fight? What about your backbone?" I didn't think it would be this easy. But as they looked at the lineup of old and disabled guards, sympathy quickly grew. They thought that this should be the result of their lord's show of power. With the noble alliance leader killed, the nobles who maintained these cities had no time for them, as they should have already escaped. The commanding officer, however, maintained a stern expression as he raised his hand to signal the army to halt. He couldn't risk his troops, maybe it was a trap set by the opposing force. "Hold your positions and maintain vigilance," he called out as they slowly marched to the city. The city inhabitants, instead of cowering in fear, approached them with tentative smiles. It was a weird sight as they unconsciously lowered their guard. The people who were talking in the pub earlier were probably the most excited, as if they were awaiting their saviors. They looked at the army to see where they hid their legendary rations that would be distributed to the city inhabitants, or so they had heard. But to their disappointment, there was not even a vehicle or anything similar in sight. What they didn't know was that supplies come after they finish conquering a city or after they have rested. Their disappointment turned into excitement as they heard the sound of rumbling wheels getting closer and closer. A line of carriages laden with provisions and supplies rolled into the city. Earlier, the leading officer responsible for the rations saw that there was no battle for a while, so he took out a long-distance telescope to look. Noticing the commanding officer signal for him to come, he quickly ordered the carriages to move. The soldiers began to unload the much-needed food for the residents. It dawned on some soldiers that this surrender was not born out of fear of defeat, but out of a desperate struggle that needed relief. The people of Maple Leaf City received the food and supplies with gratitude, their eyes sparkling. For the troops, it was a gesture to quickly integrate the people into Lord Maximus' rule, but for the residents, it was a life-saving thing that alleviated their suffering and prevented further loss of life. The soldiers couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: compassion for the plight that the people in the kingdom faced, and a renewed sense of purpose to their mission, knowing that they were saving people who were suffering. Under the darkening sky, soldiers and citizens mingled, sharing stories and finding solace in this cruel chaos that was happening in the kingdom. Chapter 39: Kingdom Unification. In the grand dining hall of the castle, Maximus sat at the head of a long oak table with his family. The soft clinking of silverware against porcelain echoed as they indulged in their sumptuous meal. The aroma of exquisite dishes, infused with savory spices, enveloped their senses as they ate. As he took a sip of wine, his mind reflected on the events of the past few months. The report on the annexation of Maple Leaf City had made him realize the urgency of the matter. The death of Harrington, the leader of the Noble Alliance, became the final straw that shattered the fragile Noble Alliance. Without guidance, chaos ensued as everyone sought petty profits and revenge. While some wise individuals prepared for their escape upon knowing he was a nascent mage. With the dissolution of the Noble Alliance, a power vacuum left the common people severely affected. In the Fairy Kingdom, due to severe food shortages, Etheria Market somewhat became the life-saving straw for most of the cities. It provided enough food for survival, but the nobles who provided money and manpower for the supplies were too preoccupied with fighting and fleeing for themselves, neglecting the plight of these poor people who faced hunger and despair. He realized that attacking cities individually was an inefficient strategy. Therefore, he devised a plan to send envoys to different locations, informing them of a decree that if they were willing to surrender to him, he would provide food and assistance. This proved to be successful as the envoys sent by him reached various cities and regions in the kingdom. The envoys spread the message of his decree, emphasizing the benefits of surrendering to his rule. In response, the hungry and excited people banded together to attack anyone who considered the idea revolting or those who had guts to stop them from getting the benefits provided for those who surrendered. They desperately needed food, and such a decree was like a godsend, alleviating their misery. To their delight, the food and various promised benefits arrived in shipments within a few days. Maximus also appointed at least one capable individual to maintain law and order, awaiting further instructions. As more cities surrendered and began to recover and stabilize, neighboring regions witnessed a positive transformation. Even cities far away voted for representatives to take initiative, as they couldn't wait any longer without risking death from hunger. This created a ripple effect as more territories recognized the advantages of surrendering. They saw themselves being saved or at least having enough to eat to rebuild their shattered societies. Maximus' reputation grew, catching the attention of the neighboring kingdom. Originally, they planned to seize the opportunity once the Noble Alliance and the Dukes had exhausted their strength. However, before they could take action, Maximus appeared with his Tier 3 nascent mage strength, cutting the idea of them attacking the Fairy Kingdom. thinking that Maximus was merely engaging in some kingdom-building games for a while before heading to the central continent. So the neighboring kingdom abandoned their plans. While there were still pockets of resistance due to some ignorant and fearless nobles, that quickly calmed down, not due to Maximus' army, but because of the very people they ruled, whom they called peasants, who quickly put them into their place. As for the dukes, they were long gone, escaping from who knows where. Upon realizing Maximus' power, like the neighboring kingdom, they had no intention of resisting and promptly fled with their wealth and loyal soldiers. As Maximus savored the lavish feast, his attention turned to his newly wedded wife, Irene. They had been married just a month ago, with the teasing from his wives and Irene's shyness, which was really cute. He gave into his heart and married her. "How are you finding life in the castle, Irene?" he asked, cutting into a steak. Irene's eyes sparkled and her lips formed a shy smile. "Oh, it's okay," she replied softly, avoiding delving further into the topic. Not minding her lack of response, Maximus continued to eat. His wives and concubines engaged in lively conversations about their daily lives, like the new food they discovered in the streets of the city. They also playfully competed to see who could feed the two newborn babies first. Though it wasn't ideal for few-month-old babies to eat processed food, there was no need to worry, as they were consuming a magical fluid substance that was beneficial for them. The two babies were named Sam and Luke. While they played, one of the babies cooed in Irene's arms, oblivious to the world around him, even then his eyes fixated on the food, eagerly waiting to be fed. The other children, like Lila and Lydia, who were already a year old, couldn't help but feel a tinge of jealousy. "Mommy, feed me too," Lila exclaimed as she climbed out on her chair, walking towards Luna for a hug. All right, sweetie," Luna said, fetching a plate of food and feeding her. Lila smiled happily as if she had just tasted the sweetest thing. Witnessing this scene, Lydia couldn't resist approaching her mother, Livia, but being shy, she could only walk silently up to her mother and gazed into her eyes with a pleading look, as if tears could pour out in her eyes. Livia chuckled and said, "Here you are," as she spoon-fed her a mouthful of food, causing Lydia to blush in shyness. Meanwhile, Lily, who observed it all, silently ate her food, reminding herself, "You're already 3 years old, you need to be more mature." However, her eyes kept darting toward her parents, hoping to gain their attention. Unfortunately, they didn't notice her pet meow expression, which quickly dampened her mood. As for the boys, they were simply eating and conversing with their brothers. "How is your training, brother?" Max and Nathan huddled around their older brother, Liam, eager to talk about his training. Apparently, Liam had just started his training a few days ago because he had nagged Maximus about wanting to become strong. Being a loving father, Maximus agreed to his son's request. "Hey, you should have seen me earlier. I can already do cool moves with Dad." "Unfortunately, you were sleeping in your little tummies," Liam coolly said with a fake expression of regret, forgetting that he had stumbled and even tripped into the dirt while attempting some clumsy moves. "Wow, brother, you're so cool. Can we start training too?" Max asked, his voice filled with excitement, imagining all the moves they could do, like flying, firing fireballs, or striking a super cool pose. Nathan nodded vigorously, eager to join in on the action. Yeah. We want to be strong like you, Liam." Liam, satisfied with their attention, he puffed out his chest proudly. "Well, guys, training is not easy. You have to be strong like me, and more importantly, you're still too young. Unlike me, I'm 3 years old, already an adult." Max and Nathan's expressions quickly turned disappointed as they glanced at their small bodies, then back at their brother Liam, who was barely taller than them. "We can do it too, brother. Look, in just a few days, we can catch up to your height," Max said as he stood next to Liam, comparing their heights with his little arms. Liam chuckled, somewhat embarrassed, as he ruffled Max's hair. "No, you still need a year to start training, according to Dad." Lily, who saw all of this, rolled her eyes as she had witnessed Liam tumble and fall earlier in the morning, attempting what he thought was a cool move. "Idiots," she murmured to herself, still feeling upset about her parents not paying attention to her. As the dining continued, the grand hall resounded with laughter and cheerful chatter. Witnessing it all brought a smile to Maximus' face. Chapter 40 Lady Isabella. Isabella stood in a lavishly furnished chamber, the soft glow of candlelight illuminating the room. She was entranced as she gazed at herself in the mirror, which reflected a woman exuding both seductiveness and maturity. When she was still young, her father passed away, leaving behind a noble title that Isabella inherited. This granted her a position of power, which was a rarity for women in this strength-oriented world. Due to her newfound status, despite being 30 years old, Isabella remained unmarried. She devoted herself primarily to managing her territory and studying the arcane arts. This dedication had propelled her to achieve the rank of Tier 2 Great Mage at such a young age, aided by her inherent talent and abundant resources. However, after reaching such a pinnacle of strength, she found herself unable to advance further. She originally planned to go to the Central Continent, renowned as the birthplace of arcane arts, to further her magic. But, before she could prepare on her journey, Harrington promised to provide her with plenty of mage resources if she joined him in his cause. This got her to hesitate, as it was too dangerous for her to go to another continent, with her current level of power. Isabella reluctantly agreed, at least for the time being. Thus, she dedicated a portion of her time to assisting Harrington in managing the noble alliance and dealing with troublesome nobles. However, an unexpected turn of events occurred before the promised resources could be given: news of Harrington's death. In the absence of a figurehead, the nobles were like little kids when left unchecked, so it eventually crumbled into chaos. It was during this period of turmoil that Isabella chose to stay away from this unruly bunch. Furthermore, she heard that Maximus, the one responsible for Harrington's demise, had attained the strength of a Tier 3 Nascent Mage. This piece of news shook her to the core, prompting her to consider an alternative path. The Central Continent enticed her with its unparalleled concentration of mana, which in turn produced large amounts of magic resources. A huge temptation that beckoned aspiring mages. However, accessing such abundant resources required joining various factions and signing binding contracts. Rather than venturing into the perilous continent, Isabella decided to surrender to Maximus. She hoped to gain resources and, at the very least, obtain insights into his path as a mage. It seemed a safer option compared to the unknown dangers that awaited her on the Central Continent. Upon arriving in Moonshadow City, Maximus immediately recognized Isabella's intelligence and offered her the position of secretary. Instead of a salary, Maximus would provide her with mage resources. At first, Isabella was unaware of the responsibilities and duties of a secretary, until Maximus explained that being a secretary was akin to being a eunuch in service to the ruler. In this case, a woman would fulfill the duty of assisting the leader. Knowing that it's the same as her previous role in the Noble Alliance, Isabella quickly accepted the position. As she stood before the mirror, Isabella prepared to depart for the castle. A meeting was scheduled for today to discuss the issues and reorganization of the territory. Isabella stepped out of her house as she looked upon the bustling street and clean street. When she first came here, she was shocked by such a prosperous scene that you can rarely see in this world. The sound of chatter caught her attention as the common people were talking about the recent activities of their lord. After walking through the streets for a while, her eyes were drawn to a majestic castle. It dominated the city landscape, radiating an aura of respect and wonder. The castle seemed to have a life of its own, with ancient inscriptions all over the weathered stones. Upon reaching the main entrance, two towering wooden doors adorned with arcane symbols opened automatically as the gatekeeper welcomed her entrance. Then she spotted her fellow officials who were also making their way inside. "Hello, Lady Isabella," said one of the officials in a flattering tone. "Hello," although she was puzzled by the flattering tone, Isabella still greeted back. Inside the castle, Maximus was lost in his thoughts as he observed the officials entering through the grand doors. Looking bored, his gaze landed on Isabella, who stood out like a sore thumb among the old officials. Despite Isabella's past allegiance to the enemy, Maximus chose to employ her, recognizing her intelligence and strength, which would be useful for his rule. Secretly, he saw this as an opportunity to get closer to her. She was also on the list of potential concubines that the Phantom Group had investigated in the past. When he first saw her, he was momentarily shocked. For the reason why, one could look at Isabella's profile. Isabella Everthorn. Strength, Tier 2 Great Mage. Potential, Legendary. Fit, 99. Seeing her legendary potential, which was the same as his despite his cheat, a trace of envy flickered within Maximus. However, what caught his attention was the high fit value, which was almost full, indicating a near-perfect match made for him. Looking at Isabella's remarkable talent and near-perfect fit value, Maximus couldn't help but recall the criteria of the system fit value from years of testing. He had tested the fit values to multiple targets over the years, which made him realize why Isabella had such a near-perfect fit value. Firstly, the system considered natural beauty. By a natural, it meant untouched by artificial means such as potions or magic items. It had to be inherent, an innate beauty that couldn't be altered. Maximus tested it on his wives and noticed that even as their strengths grew, the fit remained constant, even though one could become more beautiful as their strength grew. Secondly, talent. Although the addition of talents to the fit value was minimal. Trash talents received a value of 0, common talents earned 1, uncommon talents earned 2, and so on. When he saw this, he immediately gave up on this path, as improving talent to a certain point became very expensive. If it was just improving trash talent to common talent, it would only cost a few dozen of gold coins. However, going further became 100 times more expensive. Improving uncommon talent to rare talent cost hundreds of thousands, which was insane. Fortunately, the system had the ability to enhance his own talent, or he would have gone bankrupt with his initial trash talent. Lastly, personality. While the first two factors added points, personality deducted points. He discovered this while looking at the noble ladies in the kingdom. Although they appeared beautiful and had decent talent, their fit values were much lower than usual. This factor seemed to be a big disadvantage of the system, but upon further consideration, he appreciated this factor very much as it helped him avoid potential traps. And if an individual possessed enough beauty and potential to ignore just a restriction, then even if their attitude came from hell, he was willing to tolerate and educate them. This factor may not be all the factors the system considers, but based on his testing in recent years, it's what he knows for now. A few minutes later, all the officials took their seats, waiting for him to speak. "Welcome, gentlemen.